Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha and welcome back to 3 Books. Yes, we are the world's only podcast exclusively by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. And you have joined our epic quest to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world. Well, how are we going to do that? 1,000 of the world's most formative books? You can't just figure that out. No algorithm actually is going to figure that out for you people. We are going to sit down with 333 of the most inspiring people we can find over the next 15 years, ranging from Chapter 5, Gretchen Rubin, author of The Happiness Project, Chapter 7, Vishwas Agrawal, the world's greatest Uber driver with a 4.99 rating and over 5,000 rides. Give it up for Vishwas Agrawal. Chapter 17, Emily McDowell of the incredible Emily McDowell Studios. And Chapter 18, of course, with David Sedaris. The one and only David Sedaris, one and only for everybody on the show. But those are a few of the highlights. And you know what? It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun because we are publishing every single chapter on the exact minute of each full moon and each new moon. So this chapter is actually being published officially at 12:16 a.m. Eastern Time on January the 21st. Why? Because it's the first wolf moon and supermoon of 2019. You're probably wondering what a supermoon is, as I was. That is when the moon is in its closest approach to the Earth. Let me get the exact number for you here. It's less than 250,000 kilometers away. Super close. Did you look up to the sky today? And was it like a gigantic full moon? If so, that's because it is the supermoon. There are an average of 2 supermoons a year. So happy supermoon, everybody. And what is the wolf moon? The wolf moon, let me get this for you, is the name of the first ever full moon of each year, named after howling wolves. In some cultures, it's known as the old moon, the ice moon, the snow moon, or the moon after Yule. I like old moon. Ice moon's also pretty good, but let's go with wolf moon. So happy wolf moon, happy supermoon, everybody. And like I said, welcome back to 3 Books. You are in for a total treat this time because we are going to the second floor of Mabel's Fables, an incredible children's bookstore in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, to sit down with Paulette Bourgeois. Who is Paulette Bourgeois? Well, she is the author of the 60 million copy gigantic international bestseller, Franklin the Turtle series. Did you grow up with Franklin the Turtle? We were handed like a dog-eared stack of them when my son was born, and as my wife and I flipped through them, you know, Franklin and the Thunderstorm, Hurry Up Franklin, Franklin in the Dark, we just couldn't help sort of buy into the whole Franklin universe. There's Beaver and there's Bear and there's Fox, and like essentially there's values and there's good parenting and there's good life lessons and there's good morals, and it's delivered in a way that's super appetizing for children. And so I was totally expecting Paulette Bourgeois to sort of give me, 3 children's books that were most formative to her. But she did not. It's I don't mean to tease it, but it's like the books couldn't be more further away from children's book. In fact, the first one is actually our first ever horror book in the top 1,000. But the other 2 are also very intriguing. Who is Paulette Bourgeois? She studied journalism. She's born in Winnipeg. Winnipeg? She's born in Quebec. What am I talking about? Get my provinces straight, people. Winnipeg also is not a province, in order to continue my total erroneous Canadian geography here. She's from Quebec, and she studied journalism at Carleton University in Ottawa, worked as a reporter for the Ottawa Citizen and CBC Television, became a freelance journalist in Washington, D.C., which we're going to talk about, contributing to magazines like Chatelaine, Canadian Living, Reader's Digest, and Maclean's, and returned to Toronto in 1983, eventually finishing up her MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia. But here's the interesting thing about Paulette. After the birth of her first child, she's at home and she's watching MASH. She's watching like an episode of MASH in season 7, where Hawkeye admits that he is claustrophobic and he refuses to go into a cave. He actually says this quote on the episode of MASH: "If I were a turtle, I would be afraid of my own shell." I don't know how many of you watched that episode of MASH season 7, but I'm assuming nobody else then wrote a children's book about that metaphor. In her case, the book was called Franklin in the Dark, about a turtle afraid of its own shell, afraid of the dark. And that turned into a series of books that, like I said, have sold over 60 million copies in dozens and dozens of languages around the world. They have touched my family and my children and me and my wife in a really, really special and unique way. So it was a complete honor to go up to the second floor of Mabel's Fables bookstore in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, to sit down with the one and only Paulette Bourgeois. Here we go. Hi, Paulette.
Hello, Neil.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me in Mabel's Fables.
It's just the best store in the whole world.
I was going to ask you how you picked it because I asked you where you wanted to have this chat, and you picked right away. You said like Mabel's Fables.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'm a kids book writer, right? And this place is all of the energy and excitement of all of my life as a writer. I took writing lessons here.
Really?
That's right. Before, they used to have a little classroom here in the back. And I did one of my first book launches here.
Which book?
It would have been Hurry Up, Franklin.
Hurry Up, Franklin. The second.
It was the second book.
Yeah.
And that was the year that I think this
one of my
store
favorites.
opened. I'm glad.
Because I can relate. I'm always late.
Well, we both made it on time today.
I know.
Which is a surprise. And then we had an absolutely wonderful program at my kids' local school because we really were in walking distance to Mabel's Fables. And I know you celebrate librarians on this podcast. Yep. And we had the most wonderful school librarian, Nancy Young, who started a program where every child who had a birthday at our public school was encouraged to buy a book in their name to donate to the school library.
Oh, wow.
And so we have all the books also from Mabel's Fables. Wow. And then she had a sale every year. And so this is a really special place for me.
Well, it's incredible. It's a 2-story children's bookstore that's over 30 years old. We're sitting upstairs right now in a room kind of cordoned off behind the young adult fiction. I noticed they have the whole, like the first story says 7 and under, and the upper story that we're on is age 8 and above. Right. So they've split it off kind of that way, which is nice. And we're in this back room. It's painted yellow. The entire walls around us, I'm going to have to take some pictures for the 3books.co kind of blog post, are covered in like a graffiti wall of children's authors who have signed it, who have drawn pictures. Have you decorated the wall? Do
you know what? I probably have, and I'm going to have to look and find my name because I don't have a vivid memory of doing it.
It's amazing looking around. I mean, I'm looking at Babar. I can see all these characters from books all around me.
There are, but there's also original illustrations that have either been donated by the authors or purchased by Eleanor, who owns the bookstore.
Like that framed Franklin right there?
That's right. That's from Franklin in the Dark, and that's an original.
That's the original, like Brenda Clark?
It is.
Wow.
I know.
And so thank you so much for giving a thought to which 3 books most shaped your life. And I got to tell you, Paulette, I was expecting you to send me 3 children's books. I was like, oh, I wonder which 3, in my head, I was like, I wonder which 3 children's books she's going to send me. And of course, no, we're going to start off with instead a horror written in 1948 by Shirley Jackson titled The Lottery and Other Short Stories. So The Lottery was published in the New Yorker back in the 1940s. It received the most hate mail of any article ever published in the New Yorker's history.
That's extraordinary. I didn't know that. Yeah. I knew it was a controversial story.
And the story, it's a very short story. You know, Stephen King on the back of the book says, perhaps more than anything else, the horror story or horror movie says it's okay to join the mob, to become this total tribe being, to destroy the outsider. It has never been done better or more literally than in Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery. And there's a bunch of other kind of quotes back here. Shirley Jackson lived from 1916 to 1965, and she's widely noted as the exemplar of the American Gothic movement. So before we dive too deep into the themes that are in the short stories in this book, as well as, of course, The Lottery, the title story, I'd love for you to just take over from me and tell us about your relationship with The Lottery by Shirley Jackson.
I thought long and hard about which of the books to choose. It's a really great exercise, actually. So my first choice was going to be a Nancy Drew or a Cherry Ames,
Yeah.
like a lot of women, because
Too
they
obvious.
well, not only too obvious, but did they change me? I don't think so. I think they were great reads, and they took me through many summers, and I enjoyed her feisty nature. But did it inform me? Did it change me? Did it really do anything in my life generally? No, but I'm glad I had
Yeah.
Nancy Drew when I was, sort of sitting in a bunk by myself. But the lottery, I was first introduced to. I was at a new high school. We moved frequently when I was a kid, and I went to 3 different high schools. And so the lottery was the first book of short stories in my first English class at the new school. And I don't think until that point I'd ever
Whereabouts were
registered.
you?
We were in Beaconsfield, Quebec, and we'd moved from Ottawa. And English was always something I'd been good at. So I was worried about the French, and I was worried about the math and a whole different provincial system. But as soon as I read The Lottery, I honestly had an epiphany. It was that, oh my gosh, stories can actually change your thinking. Stories can affect you profoundly. A short story could do that. You didn't even have to delve into all these characters and these places. One idea so clearly said, and it's about, for me, The Lottery is, I don't know, maybe I should tell briefly what
please
this.
do.
So The Lottery takes place in this bucolic small town. You have a sense of an unfolding day by day, very ordinary life, but there's some excitement building. It's a fair, and you have this anticipation. You're thinking, oh well, is it like a 4-H thing? What's everyone so excited about
4-H?
this? Oh, 4-H is a country thing where kids belong to a club and they raise a cow and it becomes the best calf, or they bake the best pie. It's really a country fair
like that
kind
fair
of
they
thing.
have in Toronto every winter.
The Royal
Winter Fair, like
exactly.
the best bovine award.
And then people still do that. And in rural areas, 4-H is a very big deal.
I've just displayed my city roots there by asking.
and that's quite all right. But in this story, that the tension is building and building and building. But it's so subtle. Shirley Jackson is so subtle. And in the end, what it is it is a lottery, and you pull to find out whether or not you're the chosen one. And the chosen one is the one who's going to be stoned to death by everybody. Children, it could be a child, it could be a mother, it could be, the preacher in town. One person every year, for as long as anyone can remember, has been stoned to death on this day. And the idea
and that ultimate reveal of what the buildup is for isn't revealed till the very last sentence or two of the entire story.
I know. And I get goosebumps thinking about it. And I reread it before we met. And I thought, it is still so profound. It's about how we can accept what is considered normal, that is so outrageous. How could people who, in this normal everyday back and forth, a mother and child, could the child throw a stone to kill his or her mother? And I think it was also that there are hints that people are trying to change things.
Yeah.
But nobody really wants to. A town over the last way tried to change it. Didn't go so well. And is it about an age-old belief that you have to make a sacrifice once a year for the crops to grow?
That's what they say in the story.
That's what they say in the story. But is it deeper? Is it really about channeling all that anger and hate and giving it a way of finding its own place so it dissipates for the rest of the year? I just thought there were so many issues and so many things to think about.
Oh, I love the way you described it, because it is powerful. It gave me good. I didn't want to read it at night because of all the blurbs on the cover and the back saying how scary it was. Stephen King saying it's like the scariest thing he's ever read. Shirley Jackson's are amongst the most terrifying stories ever written, says Donna Tartt on the front. So I'm like, I don't want to read it before bed. And eventually, so I waited till the daytime. I read it, and it's the same feeling. Like, it was a slow buildup. It must be where they got the opening of the Hunger Games.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I saw
Right.
a lot of parallels
It feels like
in
this is
that.
like ripped straight to the Hunger Games, right? Where they pull someone and
Well, all good work is
right.
ripped from somebody else, right?
Exactly.
And then made its own. But the other stories, I didn't see them as horror stories at all, Neil. I think for me they were about human nature, and her biography is also absolutely it's absolutely brilliant. She was such an odd homebody person. I mean, she was a baker and a mom, but then she also had all these, this really dark side. And a lot of her houses in her books and stories become characters.
Yeah. And it says, sadly, as in the 1960s, before she was even 50 years old, she became obese. She was smoking cigarettes. She eventually had heart failure. She's very reclusive in the last few years of her life. There's the phone ring, and that proves that we're actually in a live working bookstore. Do you think there's parallels to the lottery to today? If so, what can we, we live in a populist, society. We do follow the norms. We don't challenge. We don't speak truth to power in many places in our lives. I know. I mean, I worked for 10 years inside Walmart, the world's largest company. In huge companies and organizations, there are meaningful values and norms and ideals and ways you do things and ways you don't do things. And part of what I think makes the lottery uncomfortable, at least for me, when I was reading it, it was like you can see yourself in the whole story right till the end. And you're like, oh no, I could be following down a pathway myself of following the rules until something busts.
I think I don't know that we follow the rules. I think that we do have certainly value systems, and so to have your sense of values in the face of all of these things that sort of mock them in some cases, I think it's finding your voice and not being afraid to express and teaching children. I think what we have to do is to teach children to say, no, I think that's wrong. No, I understand why this person is being bullied, but how can I stop that? I think finding a voice is really important, particularly now when it is so populous. And I think that in this story, I mentioned it, that people are saying, there are other towns that have tried to get rid of the lottery. We have mass movements trying to get rid of misogyny and sexism and sexual assault and abuse in the States. People are not being quiet. People are not just moving along. And I look to young people. I think our kids from sort of 10 up are making change. Their voices are being heard. We have the We movement. We have them saying, no, we have to stop the bullying. They're very vocal, and I just wish they could vote.
Yeah, exactly. How do we do it though? You're a children's book author. Your books have sold 60 million plus copies.
So they say. I don't know. Talk
Who's
to my
counting?
banker.
Someone's counting. And you just said children need to be able to say, no, that's wrong. I'm a parent. I have young children. A lot of people listening are in the same boat. We struggle. I can speak for myself. There's a lot of things coming at kids these days in terms of screens and what's on them. What do we do? What are some of the ways that we can imbue some of those values to speak up, to recognize right from wrong in very young children? I'm asking you as someone who's been speaking to young children for decades.
I have been, and I don't think I've been trying to teach young children, but I guess, and I didn't try to be didactic in my books, but I think that I'm a parent too, and now a grandparent, and I see the influences on them, but I don't think things have changed in one way, and that children respond the way they're shown to respond. They mimic, they follow. And as parents, we're not perfect. We make mistakes.
You used to make me really worried when you said that.
We make all kinds of mistakes, but it's true that our core values shine through our family life. How we respond. If your child is with you, I remember an incident actually with my son who is about 10. We were driving to Ottawa, where his grandparents lived, and we stopped to get gas and something to eat. And a teenage boy stopped me and said, "Oh, ma'am, my car's broken down. I don't have money for gas. I forgot my wallet at home." And he gave me this long story. I thought from the get-go that it was phony, that he was just trying to get some money. But in my mind, I thought, if he's so desperate for $10, do I care at this point what he needs that $10 for? And what if the story is real? What if he does need it? What if my son was driving to see his grandparents and this really had happened? And he stops a mother and says, "Hey." So I gave him $10. And my son looked at me and said, "Oh boy, did he ever take you for one?" I said, "I'm well aware of that, Gordon, but here's my thinking." And I was just sharing with him my thought process about what was right, what was wrong, and then we had a discussion about why kids would be asking for money that way. It ended up being a really good discussion, but I think it's showing, not telling.
Yeah.
And then sharing.
I love that. What a great story. We were coming home from the grocery store the other day, and a set of wrapped flowers must have fallen off the stroller. So we get home, we're missing the flowers. So we go back to get them on our street, presumably it was really close to the grocery store. They're gone, like somewhere on the walk, because we use the stroller as the shopping cart.
Yes, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And the wrapped flowers are like a large triangular package. So it makes sense it would just fallen off, is gone. And so my young son is like distraught. He's like, right away, he's like, "Who stole our flowers?" And all this stuff. And my wife, Leslie, the superior parent, says to him, "Wow, what do you think happened?" And he's like, "I don't know, someone took them." Right? And she's like, "Do you think maybe someone really needed flowers today?" And she totally ended up opening up all these concepts in his mind. I could just see him thinking like, somebody was having a hard day. They really needed some flowers. We maybe helped them. And it was like just injecting this empathy. I just watched her do it in front of, I was like amazed, right? Like I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have been like, "Where the heck's the flower?" I would have been
It's also
out.
a great kids book. You just give me idea for something I want to run home and write.
Please, you're very welcome. I'm going to put on the air right now, full recording. I hereby give away all rights to that idea to Paulette Bourgeois. Seriously, you're very welcome to do something. But the point is, yes, it was an opportunity for empathy that I wouldn't have thought of. I would have been angry. And you just described the exact reaction we can teach ourselves to have. If you see someone speeding past us on the shoulder of the highway, you can imagine maybe they're taking their partner to the hospital to deliver a baby. The old adage.
But isn't it also valuable to share with children the way that we can think both ways about something, and then we can say, "I wish I'd had a different reaction." One presumes that you didn't do some gross gesture in the car when your kids are in the back, or scream or whatever. But even if you did, I think to show our human, fallibility, to say, "Oh boy, I really lost it. I wish I'd handled that differently." And to show them that, we're going to make mistakes in our reactions to things too, but we can be thoughtful about it and we can change.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I almost want to pause and just soak that in. Showing them both is just such a beautiful metaphor. And you do that so well in the Franklin books. I mean, I can think of Franklin rides a bike, or he struggles to ride a bike because all his friends have learned how to ride a bike. They whiz past him. He's very frustrated. And then his mom, you have the great sense of parenting in these books, says, "Was there anything else you learned how to do easily that was harder for your friends?" And you cut back to these scenes of his friends struggling to learn how to swim and so on, showing the open-mindedness of the mother, introducing Franklin to the idea that both options exist. That's an amazing thing you do in your work.
Well, I don't think I do it deliberately or consciously. I'm glad it comes through, and I'm glad that's what it is.
My wife even just loves how Franklin's mother, gets the tool set for Christmas.
Oh, I'm glad. Well,
she loves that.
These were written a long time ago, Neil. They really were, and interestingly, it was really important for me to show fathers. In early days, and it wasn't long ago, that every father in an advertisement or in a book was a bumbling fool in terms of his kids or ignored them. And that wasn't my experience. My kid's dad was really hands-on and great. And even 30, 35 years ago, that wasn't the case with all. But the father and the mother are idealized in my books. I'm not a mom like that. I can tell you that there was one day, there's an odd thing that happened with Franklin, a very odd thing that people started referring to Brenda Clark, the illustrator, and myself as Franklin's mothers.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know any other author, children's authors or whatever, where the creator is considered the parent of the creation. Of the character. So, but Brenda and I have always been Franklin's mothers.
And for those that listen that don't know, you're the writer of all the Franklin books. Brenda Clark is the illustrator of all the
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So we've always been called the mums. So I remember one day, not being a perfect parent, that I was actually yelling at my kids, yelling so much. I can't even remember why, that I thought, oh my gosh, I have to close the windows because neighbors are going to walk by and say, is that Franklin's mummy screaming at her children?
Yeah, the opposite of what she espouses in her books.
That's right. So she's how I'd like to have been a parent. I was not a perfect parent.
And who is? And thank you for relieving me of that stress, because when I do read the Franklin books, I think like, what great parenting in all these scenes. But of course, that's aspirational, right?
Totally.
Speaking of parenting, that's a really beautiful segue. I hope you don't mind, into your second book, which is the only nonfiction one of the three, I believe, which is called "Driven to Distraction: Recognizing and Coping with Attention Deficit Disorder from Childhood Through Adulthood," written by Edward Hallowell and John Ratty. Ratty?
Do you know what? I don't know either.
Okay, good.
I just read it.
Both have an MD after their name. Both of them have ADD themselves. This book was written in 1994. And through vivid stories of the experiences of their patients, adults and children, that's the big point that they make adults too, Doctors Hallowell and Ratty show the varied forms ADD takes, from the hyperactive search for high stimulation to the floating inattention of daydreaming, and the transforming impact of precise diagnosis and treatment, as well as, it doesn't say in the back, a lot of the positive elements of ADD. This was written over 20 years ago. Tell us about your relationship with Driven to Distraction.
It was a book that was the first time I think I'd understood myself. It helped me see that my impulsiveness, my creativity, my lack of filters sometimes.
Which we love about. That's what's great about podcasting with you. Just spew it out. That's good. It makes good tape.
Well, it and it's actually, I am just being myself, Neil. My son was going into ninth grade. He had bright, engaging kid who could focus on a tennis ball like nobody's business, but had real trouble focusing in a classroom and other things. But it was always, oh, he's just being lazy. He's not paying attention. And I kept thinking, this is coming from his teachers and his father. And I kept thinking, no, I think there's something more. But gee, when he needs to focus, he's great. And no, he's not running around crazy. But there's something wrong, something that's making him not do well at school and feel awkward at school. And he was at an all-boys school that was really demanding at that time. And they didn't look well on, maybe there's a problem here, because it points at something, either a teacher's, not being able to meet that kid's needs, or not being a perfect student to represent that school body. So my son decided to go to a different school for ninth grade. And I said, look, I think it's time for some testing just to make sure this experience goes really well. I said to Gordon, you know too, there's some disconnect here, right? You're smart. How come the smart's not coming out in the marks or the comments from the teachers? And you're a great athlete, and that's how you're coping. But long story short, we don't have all day. He was diagnosed with a unusual form of ADHD with some accompanying learning disabilities that were easily, could be worked upon, but he did need some medication. And he was given, because he was at a boarding school, actually, they were able to do drug trials with a nurse there. So he didn't know what drug he was taking. And the nurse and the teachers evaluated what it was. And they just asked him for a self-evaluation. Do you notice any difference? Do you see any difference? Of nothing, nothing, nothing. And then one morning he tried a new medication. The first morning he tried it. And he called me and he said, Mom, is this how other people's brains work? And it was just something that allowed him then, with teachers helping him find methods to cope with a lot of things. So he ended up doing extraordinarily well once this was diagnosed. But when the psychiatrist talked with all of us about what this was, he looked at me and he said, it's often genetic. And I said, "Oh,
you think my husband has it?"
No, I actually had enough insight, Neil, to say, my goodness. So I got tested by somebody who specializes in adult ADHD and read this. And it really changed my life. I had a coach who showed me.
You have ADHD.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I do have ADHD. I'm just certifiably ADHD. And it was such a relief. And this book explained it even further.
They say 15% of the population. I don't know if that's still the number.
I don't know
but
either.
It's a high number.
I know that we suspect too, my daughter probably has it as well, but it just explains so much. I didn't feel like a weird. Take me into
that a bit. Tell me more about how you feel and where that.
So I try to explain. So my partner now is an accountant. He does not have ADHD. He can look at a set of ledgers with joy, and
that's less than 15% of the population.
That's also true. And so he doesn't understand a lot of this. I mean, he finds it hysterical sometimes because it's just so different. But I said to him that imagine that your head is a filing, like a row of filing cabinets. You, Kenneth, I say just, the file you want. You open the drawer, you pull it out, you deal with it, you put it back in. A person with ADHD, this is how I explain it. Every filing cabinet is open. Every file is open. Every file is accessible at any time, and every file demands your complete attention.
Wow.
So you have to find a way of shutting down the noise of all of that, of finding a way to close the drawers. I really do visualize this as I'm sitting down to concentrate. I found meditation really helpful as a way of brushing away thoughts and allowing me to find a way to focus. I do take medication. Sometimes if I'm doing a nonfiction book, for instance, and I'm on deadline and everything's out, if I put something away, I forget it exists. So my room, we would never do an interview in my office. There are stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks. I know what's in each of the stacks, but if the stack isn't there, if it would be put away in a filing cabinet, I wouldn't remember what that was. I wouldn't be able to find it. I wouldn't recall.
Wow. That's an incredibly powerful metaphor. I'm imagining people listening, and I always think of this conversation as a three-way conversation with a third person. That's why I do the left ear, right ear thing. A third person being the person listening right now. Hopefully resonates with someone, because sometimes just having a metaphor like that can help us realize things about ourselves. I know the book, for example, Quiet by Susan Cain. The number one piece of feedback I hear about this is that it's the book about introverts. The number of feedback I hear from people who love this book is like, it finally put into words the thing I was living with my whole life that no one else had articulated for me before. And it sounds like Driven to Distraction, and of course your story with your son and yourself did the same, gave you that same kind of gift.
It will, sometimes he'll call me and say, oh, I'm having one of those days. And he'll explain and say, oh yeah, well, try this. This is my son, who's now 35 and the father of this little grandbaby. I also explain it.
So sorry, he'll call you. I just missed that. He'll call you and say, everything feels.
Well, I'm having a day where, I knew that I had a squash game at 4, but I also, I knew that I had a presentation to do. And so I've got my squash things in the office, but my presentation's in the gym and, or at the club locker. And I don't know where the keys are because I have to go. And it was just a day when everything just conspires to.
All the files are open.
All the files are open. And it was a day when you didn't sit down and consciously say, here's what I have to do.
And what's your advice when he calls you like that?
Oh, we just basically we laugh with each other. We basically laugh with each other. It's like, and they say, can I help in any way? Do you need me to run to the, to the gym, or, do you want me to pick up your wife and get the keys from her, or just an acknowledgement that this happens.
What a gift. What a gift that he can pick up the phone and be so understood in such a way that all you do is try to do what a parent is trying to do their whole life, I guess, which is give your kids.
I hadn't thought of it as a gift, so thank you for that. But it really is. I explain to people it's
the reason
other
I say
things
it's a
too.
gift because people probably say all the time, like, well, you're late. Like the only thing he hears is negative feedback about all those little misses.
Yeah, and he doesn't want to sound like a flake and saying, well, you see, but it's this litany is something that I could absolutely understand. So I have friends who are very organized, and they'll come to my kitchen, which is now better organized because I live with an accountant. But I would find that I start out, moving into a new place, as we just did. This is our first home together. We moved in, and you take everything out of the boxes. And so I, like other people, would have cups and saucers and plates and bowls, and everything would be accessible. And within about 2 weeks, Ken would say, what is this? Like, where is everything? It's like, oh, you see, those are all things I need for breakfast. And those are all things I need for dinner. And like, they just don't follow the same organizational path. But it allows me to be a writer. I am a writer because of my ADHD. I can take very disparate ideas and connect them in ways that somebody else might not, because I see things in this very holistic way.
And it sounds like, if I'm hearing you right,
I think that's what I do.
Well, that is what you do, and that's why your books are so accessible and successful. And I love them. My kids love them. But I don't want to wade into waters that I'm not kind of super comfortable with, but I'm going to anyway. Which is like, there's a lot of debate about medication, right? Especially for children. And it sounds like this book, During Distraction, is quite pro medication. You mentioned a story where your son kind of took a medication that really worked for him. Your experience, I'm not saying, give me the sort of research summary, but your experience is that medication helps. It works. It has worked in your family.
Medication has worked in my family, but I think it is not the only answer. And I too would be very, very suspicious of a lot of medication with very young children. I think that our teachers, and Leslie, your wife, is a teacher.
Yes, she is, yeah.
And so when you're dealing with the classroom and you've got somebody whose all the focus has to be on that kid's attention, or not attention, or trying to create attention, I think that you want a solution for that too. And if medication seems to calm that kid down, that's something. But I think we're doing young children, I think we're doing everybody a disservice if medication is the first and only solution. We now know that yoga for young children, meditation for young children, ways of managing their, for instance, even a weighted blanket for a kid, that they're feeling that they're really, I used to be an occupational therapist.
You're giving me Christmas present ideas now.
I used to be an occupational therapist.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I dealt with children. So that dovetails with everything that I think and do and write. And I know that there are methods that we can use to help children really reprogram their brains in ways.
What's the heavy blanket do?
The heavy.
I just had a reaction to it because it just felt so good in my head.
I actually sleep with a weighted blanket.
Wow.
It's got 10 extra pounds. It's got
10-pound blanket.
10-pound blanket, and I don't get hot under it. What it does is it really, our nerve endings can be so sensitive and so attuned that this just allows everything to settle down, so you can just feel calm.
You
I'm
know,
not sure I know all the science behind it.
well,
I wouldn't pretend to.
and who cares about the science? Frankly, if it works, it works. I sort of reject the entire industry of like needing to prove everything. If it works, it works. Let's just go with that. Leslie always uses this phrase or acronym HSP, highly sensitive person, sometimes in describing herself and one of our children like this. So, for example, she'll use an eye patch at night. Even though the room is dark, there's enough little light in the room that it would sometimes wake her up, or that she would notice it, like say the moon even come through a window or something like that. But the weighted blanket seems like an additional accessory that goes on that would work for HSPs or highly sensitive people.
It does, and you can put a whole bunch of these, and I don't call them disorders. As there's so many positive things that come too. But I think we do have ways of helping kids that isn't just giving them a pill. And I think they need to know that there are ways to help themselves. How do I calm myself down? How do I make myself concentrate? There are skills that they can learn.
Wow.
And there's a belief system too, that you can actually rewire your brain to a great degree. I mean, our brains are so plastic. We know this. I think really though, when you've got ADHD, you're dealing with, a brain anomaly, and that sometimes you can work around it and work with it, but you're never going to get rid of it.
You're making like a curve around the wall type
I am.
I'm just saying that
I talk with my hands. It's the francophone in me.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. And I know it feels like we can kind of go deeper and deeper into that hole, but you've done such a beautiful job just painting this little garden of what this book has meant for you, what it's done for you, and taking us kind of up to today, where people listening and myself, like I'm excited to kind of lean into some of these ideas. Okay, thank you. Beautiful. Well, Driven to Distraction by Edward Hallowell and John Rady. We'll have to figure out his real pronunciation. We will have no problem pronouncing the last name of the next book, this magnum opus. This book lit a fire. I mean, I read this book and it just blew me away. So without further ado, this is The Bonfire of the Vanities, a novel, the first novel ever written by Tom Wolfe.
After 11 nonfiction books, I think. Was it 11?
Oh, it's a huge amount. Yeah. So it's written in 1987. It's a satirical novel. The story is about, it's a drama about ambition, racism, social class, politics, and greed in 1980s New York City. It centers on three main characters: WASP bond trader Sherman McCoy, Jewish assistant DA, assistant district attorney Larry Kramer, and British expatriate journalist Peter Fallow. The novel was originally conceived as a serial in the style of Charles Dickens' writings, because he had apparently like a huge bout of writer's block, and he called up Rolling Stone and they said, okay, we'll run it in 27 installments. They paid him a $200,000 advance.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
He couldn't figure out a way to get out of his writer's block, he said. So because he started researching this book in the early 1980s, started serializing it in 1984, and then eventually heavily revised it before publishing it as a book, as a novel in 1987. It took off, was a huge bestseller, phenomenal success, and has been often called the quintessential novel of the 1980s. Kurt Vonnegut says Wolfe is the most exciting, most jangling journalist to appear in some time, a genius who will do anything to get attention. Although he's been criticized by people like Norman Mailer, John Updike, and John Irving, he is a very provocative writer who takes on huge subjects. And this book is like a punch in the face. It is like somebody said, it's not my phrase, grabs you by the lapels and doesn't let go. Lapels, I don't know how you say it.
Lapels, I think works.
Lapels, okay. And I could not, I mean, it's a 600-page novel that you can't stop reading. I read this probably in 2 weeks. I can't believe how fast it was, because I was like, what is this book? Well, it's electrifying.
I'm so glad that you loved it. And then when I realized how long it was, because I picked it up about the same time, I knew instantly it was a book that I wanted that was transformative, formative for me. But I thought, I didn't realize it was over 600 pages.
Oh, no.
I'm just delighted. I'm surprised you hadn't read it. And I'm delighted that you had that sense after it. What grabbed you most?
Oh my gosh! The first of all, it's the second Tom Wolfe book to appear on 3 books. So chapter 15 with Mitch Albom, Mitch recommends, one of his 3 formative books is The Right Stuff.
Yes.
Okay, so nonfiction, of course, turned into the famous movie and all that.
Great book.
This book, so I guess this is my first ever Tom Wolfe book, because when I met Mitch at the top of the Fisher Building in Detroit, He didn't tell me what his 3 books were before we chatted.
Oh,
So
that's
even though that's
interesting.
a rule of the show,
Oh,
he
okay.
broke that rule.
Okay.
So I had to like kind of I had to like kind of go with him as he was telling me the books. You know, he blurts in. So I hadn't read the right stuff before I talked to him. So, but with you graciously giving me your books in advance,
I followed the rules,
Thank
Neil.
you.
You said there were rules.
Yeah, there was rules, and thank you for following the rules. I could not. The writing is totally electrifying. The characters are massively gripping. When they, you know, in some books, a character appears on the page, you like want to follow that character, and then they disappear. You get sad, or you know, you get kind of punished when like this character disappears, or like you know, you're watching The Wire, you get excited whenever Omar is on TV, right? Every character in this book is like that. They're totally beautifully drawn. Their voice, he uses all their accents, their styles. He gets into their heads, the nitty gritty, the dark, the dirty. Like you can't stop reading because it's voyeuristic.
Mhm.
You know, it's like criticizing all these people in a really kind of way that you've thought about in your own head. And it is just, I mean, I couldn't, I gave it to my mom right after I read it. Okay. Cause we were away together on a family vacation. Right after I finished, I was like, you will not believe me when I say this is one of the best books I've ever read. I put it as #1 recommended book in my book club the next month too. And I gave it to her. She finished it the same week.
Oh, I know.
My mom couldn't stop.
Oh,
So 2 people read a 600-page
There is-
novel like super fast.
There is nothing better than passing a book to somebody and then coming back to you and saying, oh, wow, I understand what gripped you, what you felt, and you shared something really special, and that happens.
And nothing worse, which I've been guilty of many times, of returning someone's book 3 years later and saying, and sorry, despite the fact that I've borrowed it for 3 years, I still haven't read it.
But that happens too.
That happens
I mean,
too, yes. There's no judgment here, no book guilt, no book shame.
I have never understood people who open a book, read the first chapter, decide they hate it, and decide they also have to finish it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, why? There's so many beautiful things to read. Why would you spend time reading something just because you think you have to, other than for a course requirement?
You will love the fact that on 3books.co, our website, we have a little button at the top that says values. We have all our values written out. The #1 value on that whole page of values is quit more to read more. That's our #1.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So tell us about your relationship with The Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe.
It came out at a time when my first husband and I, the father of my kids, we had been living in Washington, D.C. We were both reporters. I was sort of at that point just a freelancer, having left CBC and being very junior. And they wouldn't give me a job in Washington when my husband was transferred there with Maclean's magazine. So, so we were living in the States, and it was the beginning of this explosion of. It was a challenge to values. It was a total challenge to my values. First, Americans and Canadians are not the same. We really, really are not the same. And so I was learning how to respond to, understand American. It was a very exciting time. But what I came away from
many Americans are still working on that as well.
Yes, I think so. And, I've decided, this is really tangential, but I have finally decided what the basic difference between us is. And it's really,
this is good.
It's really, really, I think, important now when we see what's happening in our two countries. And it is that it comes down to our Constitution. It doesn't come down to our personalities. Our constitutions have defined us. We came from a British model where the common good, our common law, our sense of a responsibility to the larger community is paramount. In the States, what is paramount is a right to be happy, a right to bear arms, a right to protect themselves and their families no matter what. I think that just says it right there. If you grow up learning that this is who you are, this is who you are as a country, it changes your day-to-day perceptions of everything.
Wow. I've never heard it described that way.
It's just my own philosophy.
No. But I love kind of how you've taken it kind of all the way back to the beginning, right? Because America kind of busting off from England, and us kind of, we still have the Queen and all of our money, right? Like we we still got the umbilical cord attached a little bit here.
Yeah, but it's not so much, I think yes, those are the traditions, that's true. But I think what it comes is a sense of the greater being the sum of all of its parts, and we all have to do our bit. So when it comes down to even things like looking at the horrible situations with flooding along the American coast after Hurricane Sandy and everything else, some communities called in the people from the Netherlands to say, look, how do you manage this? What do we need to do? And they were told that they had to work together as a group and maybe move all of those communities in because they were going to disappear. We said, I'm not moving. I'm not doing this for the good of the greater community. Whereas in the Netherlands, entire towns have taken up, they've actually dismantled like the clock tower.
Wow.
They worked together to make sure that in the end, they moved the whole town because they had to for the greater good, because in the end, their children would then have a town to grow up in. They didn't need these places. And in the States.
And some other town gave them space?
I guess they found space because there's not a lot of land.
Yeah.
Whether I don't know that. That's a good question.
No, I know the Maldives, for example, is, famously going to be, potentially underwater completely in 50 years due to rising sea levels. The Maldives, the country island chain of, I think, over 1,000 islands west of India. And the government, there's a great story about like how they're raising money through tourism and other means to simply purchase land from other
countries,
vacuous countries, and move the country, move the Maldives. It's an interesting kind of.
But you have to work together, and it's so partisan right now. But we were talking about the States, and we were talking about this book.
We love sidebars.
But if
you're in DC,
and then we moved back to Canada. But I'd always had this sense of what is America and what is this? And then Tom Wolfe's book came out and I went, that is it. That is it. The clothes, the time, the people, the racism, the divide. I mean, when we lived in DC, we lived in DuPont Circle, which was right on the border of a huge Cuban population, and then also a very, very impoverished African American population, and like we lived on S Street, and by U Street, you really couldn't walk alone at night especially as a white woman alone. And so we started to see racism. It was the first time I'd ever experienced being the only white person on a subway car.
Wow!
I suddenly had that realization. Oh yes. This is what it's like. This is what being the one in this sea of the other, or being the other in the sea of oneness.
The mass, the mob, hinting back at the lottery,
Well, that's actually a very good way of putting it back, being the outcast there. I experienced all those things really for the first time, only as an observer, really. But then when this book came out, I started realizing how many of those things I understood about living in America, really, at this time. And they said satirical, but it's really not.
No,
I mean, it was.
It didn't feel. They said satirical. And I read the bio too. I was like, this isn't.
No, I didn't think
funny. It's like really, actually, quite gripping. And some people have said it's dated. Actually, there's lots of it that aren't dated at all.
Well, in
huge
fact,
parts of it that actually feel more resonant today.
I believe much of it is. We still, after the financial crisis happened after this, and yet you see the beginning of that. The masters of the universe.
That's what they call themselves in the book.
That's right.
The bond traders, they refer to themselves as the
bond traders, as masters of the universe. But they believed it. And they were led to believe it, and they were given privileges because of that. And the fact that how they decide to basically, a crime is committed. But is it really a crime? Like, who is the criminal? So at the beginning of the story, you have the main character, Sherman McCoy, and his mistress,
Maria
Rivkin. He's picked her up at the airport. They make a wrong turn. They end up in a part of Brooklyn. It's Brooklyn, right?
Harlem.
Is it actually in Harlem, or?
I think it's Harlem.
Because back then, I think Brooklyn was not as it is now, like Prospect Park and everything else. But anyway, they end up in town where no white person ever goes, no white person. And they are approached by two young African-American men who offer to help them. They immediately think this is a scam. They do not want to. Maria takes the wheel of the car, and speeds off, but hits one of them. Sherman thinks they've hit somebody. Maria's not sure. It was a while ago since I read. Anyway, somebody has been hit. They're not sure. They escape feeling, oh my gosh, we got out of there with our lives. But then the whole book unravels about, did they get out with their lives? What happens? What happens when you try to cover up something you've done that you know is wrong? That's another theme through here.
Oh my gosh.
That I think is, and as parents and in kids' books, it's really, really relevant too. Like, you don't want to get in trouble. What do you cover up? How much do you tell? What are the consequences of your actions? And so I think this book, Bonfire of the Vanities, is absolutely as relevant now. And the role of women in this book too is really interesting. The roles of, trying to be the perfect wife, mother, also trying to get a job. Like, what was your place in American society at that time? He doesn't do women nearly as well. They're flat. They're a bit caricatured. They're the mistress, the social X-ray, which is a beautiful term, I think, for women who starve themselves in order to be socially acceptable in the States. Well, everywhere, really, I guess, in North America. But it was, the themes are absolutely relevant today.
Well, and he came up with so many of those phrases. I read a piece on Wikipedia, which we'll have to link in the show notes. I just wanted to see if I printed it off, and I did not. About how many words or phrases Tom Wolfe invented in his lifetime, much like Shakespeare, that we now use today, that came from him.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, we got to pull it up. I'm gonna.
I will look that up. Well, look it up on the webpage.
Paulette Bourgeois, thank you so much for your time. I thank you so much for the gift that you've given to my family. We've read the Franklin books. I mean, I want to say at least probably 20 or 30 times each book, and we have all of them, and they have become really formative. They will be on our bookshelves forever. So thank you so much for your time today.
That almost brings tears to my eyes. I didn't realize they were so important to
you
and your family,
and
that means so much to me. In fact, it's awesome.
Thank you so much. It is awesome, and Paulette is awesome, and it was such a privilege sitting down with her. Thank you, Paulette, for the great conversation and discussion about your 3 most formative books, which were number 942, The Lottery and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson, number 941, Driven to Distraction, Recognizing and Coping with Attention Deficit Disorder by Edward Hallowell and John Rady, and number 940, our first ever double appearance by an author on our list, The Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. Of course, the full list is available at 3books.co/the top 1000. By the way, Tom Wolfe's other book was number 959, The Right Stuff, which was proffered up, you could say, by Mitch Albom. I don't know if I used the word proffered right there or not, but it was inserted into our list by Mitch Albom. So Mitch Albom and Paulette Bourgeois have something else in common here. Thank you so much to Paulette. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much for 3 books kind of continuing its pledge into 2019, and let us keep going together. And now, let the pause go a little longer that time. If you made it this far in the podcast, I'd like to welcome you back to the End of the Podcast Club. This is one of 2 clubs we have for 3 Books listeners. This is the one at the end of the podcast, obviously, but there's also the Secret Club. How do you get into the Secret Club? I can't tell you much other than you have to call our phone number, which is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. 1-833-READ-A-LOT, READALOT. And with that, let's, as we always do, go to the phones.
Hi, Neil. It's Lynn calling from Sacramento, California. And I just wanted to tell you that I enjoy the long introductory music because I hear it. As soon as I hear it, it's going to be 3 books, and it just builds the anticipation until the podcast starts. So I love it. I love your podcast, and I've loved some of the books that they've talked about. So thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much to Lynn from Sacramento, California. Interesting voicemail. I loved your voicemail, Lynn. But interesting because here is the letter of the chapter. Okay, the review of the chapter. I'm going to read this at the exact same time. Let's go. Here we go. Hi, Neil. This is from a guy named Roy Blumenthal. Hi, Neil. Love the chapter of the podcast. Love this chapter of the podcast, but please, 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 please shorten the intro music. It does not do what you think it does in the explanation justification you gave. 6 seconds to 12 seconds is what you need. I subscribe to your podcast, not a music radio show. Onwards and upwards, blue skies, Roy. And Roy and I had a fun conversation back and forth after that. Listen, there's two ways to look at this. I for those of you that have been following along, I lengthened the intro music. I went back to the original composed version, right? Like I got some music composed just for this show. It took a long time. We put a lot of work into it. And then I was like, this is the music I want to feel. I want to get myself into the headspace to sort of like click that analog kind of play and record and like just kind of like jam up into these conversations. I want to get there. But some people have written me, like Roy, and very kindly, and said, this is BS, Neil. You got to shorten your music. It's too long. Like he says, I subscribe to a podcast, not a music radio show. Whereas the phone call that we just got from Lynn was like, I love the long theme music. And so, as always, it's going to have to come back down to, what do I do? I'm going to leave it long for a while. I am. I'm sorry, Roy. I don't mean to break your heart. I hope I don't lose you as a subscriber, but I like it. It's rare and unique in the world right now to have things of meat and of substance, things that are without ads, things that are focused on beauty, things that are focused on not just trying to like insert information into your brain in the fastest possible time so you're the most productive humanoid, but rather just take a breath. Recenter yourself. Get grounded. And slip into a conversation with friends. That is the feeling that I'm really trying to go for on this show. That's why we project in the left and right ear. That's why I always think about you as this person in the conversation that we're having. You, yes, you. I'm talking to you right now. And so that's a special little connection we have. And I think I'm going to try to keep that music long for that exact purpose. And because I just like it that way. Okay? Now, what should we do? Should we do another letter? I feel like those letters were a little antagonistic on me. So let me read you this other letter. I'm going to do a second letter this chapter from Sarah. Dear Neil, I absolutely loved your presentation at the Ronald McDonald House Charities International Conference in Chicago. I give speeches around the world. I just gave one, as you can tell, at the Ronald McDonald House. I won't interrupt her anymore. She's like, I've since purchased 15 copies of the Book of Awesome to give as gifts to folks who have truly been awesome to me in recent years. You see, my attendance at the Ronald McDonald House Charities Conference was particularly meaningful because as executive director of the Ronald McDonald House chapter in Lexington, Kentucky for 11 years, I helped thousands of families of critically ill children. Yet I was quite surprisingly diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in 2016. Suddenly the caregiver became the patient. It was a pretty grim prognosis, and after much chemotherapy, I ultimately required a bone marrow transplant to save my life. In total, I was in hospital for 127 days, and during most of that year, I was kept separated from my 2 young sons who were not allowed to visit me because of strict anti-infection protocols and visitor age limitations. It was pretty awful to be separated from my kiddos, but I tapped into a resilient layer of myself that I didn't even know existed, and I managed to power through and keep my spirits up. My diagnosis was exactly 3 years ago this January, and I'm very happy to report that I have achieved full remission thanks to incredible new stem cells, which were donated to me by an amazing young man I recently met in person once we were allowed to reveal our identities. Turns out he's a medical student at the University of Michigan, and he happened to join the Be the Match bone marrow registry because they had a promotional booth on campus and were giving away free donuts. Yep, my life was saved by a donut. Pretty awesome indeed. So, of course, my donor was one of the first people I gave a copy of the Book of Awesome to, with a note inside. My attendance at the Ronald McDonald House Conference felt like a dream, as there had been more than a few times I questioned whether I'd ever be able to see all my fabulous colleagues and people from around the world again. The leadership team of the RMHC were kind enough to honor me in the opening session with a video. But this has become a long-winded way to request a few stickers from you, to place some future copies of your book, which of course I sent. And I gave a copy of the Book of Awesome to my hairdresser today, who gave me a haircut after I got my first round of chemo. He gave me a punk rock hairdo for free to prepare me for the impending Sinead O'Connor transition. My takeaway is that people can be truly amazing in times of crisis, and the whole experience has left me consumed by gratitude and a desire to dedicate my life into helping others. Although I was disabled by the side effects of bone marrow transplant and unable to continue my work at the Ronald McDonald House, I have found alternative ways to connect with other patients like me and offer a bit of cheer, sympathy, and humor. Thank you for your bravery and your transparency. Your personal story is inspirational, and I'm loving 3 books. I have discovered so many wonderful reads, and I'm currently devouring There Is No Good Card for This by Emily McDowell for obvious reasons. I wish you all the best. From Sarah in Lexington, Kentucky. P.S. Feel free to share this with your podcast audience. Sarah, you just touched my heart, and thank you so much for writing in that letter. For you, and for the other letter that I just read, oh my gosh, I forgot your name, Roy, drop me a line. I always make sure that the review of the chapter gets a free copy of my book, so send that in and we'll mail you a copy of the book. Now, it's time for the word of the chapter. What is the word of the chapter? First, let's go back to Paulette.
So the lottery takes place in this bucolic small town.
The lottery takes place in a small bucolic town. Bucolic? What is that one? B-U-C-O-L-I-C. Bucolic. Say it for me, dictionary lady.
Bucolic.
Bucolic. Well, the definition is it's relating to the pleasant aspects of the countryside and of country life. Okay. Another word that it's used as a synonym is pastoral. But the interesting thing about this word, bucolic, is the origin. Very interesting. I'm going to pull it for you. It comes from the Greek word bukolikos, okay? Bukolos is a cow herd or the head of cattle, like a cow. And kolos is to cultivate. So bucolic basically means somewhere that you would cultivate or raise cows. Where would you raise cows? Well, in a bucolic town. We kind of make that word mean like picturesque and pretty and beautiful, but really it just meant somewhere where you gotta raise cows. Okay. Oh, I'm having too much fun doing this. I am loving this. Thank you, everyone. So now, look, we've got the review of the chapter. We've got the phone calls. We're having a conversation here. I just want to end this by asking you once again to leave me your feedback and your suggestions. Drop me a review in iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts. Give us a call, 1-833-READ-A-LOT. We love hearing from you. Join our secret analog only fan club. There's so many of you who have joined already. We're shipping mail-ins out in the mail. We're having a lot of fun doing that. We're getting things printed. We're shipping them out. So if you want to know how to do that, you got to call the number 1-833-READ-A-LOT. And more than anything, just keep loving books. Keep reading more. Keep enjoying yourself. Keep having fun. And more than anything else, keep turning the page. Thank you all so much. And I'll see you back again in chapter 22.